Hello, and welcome back to the Paris Peace Forum. We are at the session Improving Space Safety, Multi-Actor Option. My name is Victoria Sampson, and I'm the Washington Office Director of the Secure World Foundation, a private operating foundation that focuses on the long-term sustainable use of space. And I am utterly delighted to be here with such an esteemed panel to talk about a topic that we believe is very important, the future use and access of space. A growing number of actors are using outer space for an increasing variety of socioeconomic and national security benefits. Many of these space activities use the same regions of Earth orbit, leading to crowding and potential physical and electromagnetic interference. If we do not use space sustainably, the cost of using space will increase, which could make it too expensive to continue to use for national and international security, Earth observation, telecommunications, satellite navigation and scientific exploration, and economic development. Debris is a result of human activities in outer space. Currently, more than 26,000 pieces of debris larger than 10 centimeters are being tracked in orbit around Earth, and there could be as much as 750,000 additional untracked pieces larger than 1 centimeter. Debris colliding with one of the more than 3,300 operational satellites could result in serious damage or complete destruction of the satellite. The pieces of debris can stay in orbit for decades or even longer, depending on the orbit's altitude. A conflict in space could have devastating consequences for the long-term sustainability of space. Destroying satellites can create huge amounts of debris that could render certain areas of Earth orbit unusable. Misperceptions and mistrust with regard to military activities in space could serve as a catalyst for conflict in space or on Earth. A critical condition for space stability is an understanding of the space environment, which involves knowing the exact location of satellites and other space objects, also known as space situational awareness. Actions by one actor in space can have adverse activities on everyone. So it is important that all space activities are conducted in a safe and responsible manner, in accordance with the established laws, norms, and best practices. Because no one entity is responsible for outer space, there must be a certain level of cooperation and dialogue amongst all actors on space activities. And so with the increasing number of actors on orbit, it is also increasingly important to develop new international agreements on appropriate behavior in space. And that is what this panel will be discussing. How do we figure out how we can cooperate for space safety? Joining me today via video is Simonetta De Pippo, the Director of UNUSA, David Bertolotti, the Director of Institutional and International Affairs of Eutelsat, Chris Blackerby, the CEO of Astroscale, and Jean-Yves Le Gall, the President of CNES, the French Space Agency. I'll be going over quick bios really quickly, but we're going to start off with a video of Simonetta De Pippo. She's an Italian astrophysicist and the current director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs at UNUSA. Prior to joining UNUSA, she served as the Director of Human Spaceflight at ESA, Director of the Observation of the Universe at the Italian Space Agency, the European Space Policy Observatory at ASI Brussels. She cannot join us live, but she has sent a video, so if you please play the video now. Thank you.
Today, the value of space technology and data for socioeconomic development is beyond doubt. Research from UNUSA and the European Union shows that about 40% of the targets underpinning the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are reliant on Earth observation and global navigation satellite systems. With SATCOMs included, this percentage is even higher. The role of space for our lives is being recognized more than ever. We now have over 80 national space agencies, and in 2020 alone, more than 1,000 new satellites and other objects have been registered with UNUSA, and it is still only November. This is far above previous annual records and represents almost 10% of all the objects ever launched since 1957. With such increasing investment and global dependency, maintaining a stable, safe, and sustainable space environment is more fundamental than ever. That's why platforms like the Paris Peace Forum are so important, because it is only through open dialogue between all actors, both public and private, that we can find and expand the common ground required. We have solid foundations to build upon. The existing normative framework governing space activities has supported over 60 years of growth. These rules of the road have produced many well-established practices, such as information sharing on space activities, that are making crucial contributions to building the trust, transparency, and confidence we all need in space. Exciting new chapters for space open up. And there is, of course, always more to do. We must expand reciprocal trust, aiming at peaceful and prosperous space environment. This is what we all want. We need to deepen the transparency levels that show our commitment to the cause, and we have to maintain the confidence that we can achieve anything when we work together. This is the only way space will keep delivering such rich benefits for everyone, everywhere.
Inspiring words from Simonetta Di Pippo. Before we move on to our panelists, I would like to point out that we will be taking questions during for the Q&A in the chat. So please feel free to be sending them throughout the course of the conversation. Our first speaker is Jean-Yves Le Gall, the president of CNES, the French Space Agency. He is also co-chair of the Council of the European Space Agency and past president of the International Astronautical Federation. Jean-Yves, you have the floor.
Oui, bonjour. Donc, je suis très heureux de m'adresser à vous cet après-midi et je voudrais commencer par rappeler que les débris spatiaux constituent aujourd'hui une pollution de l'environnement circumterrestre. Leur nombre augmente régulièrement et cela représente un risque majeur pour les opérations spatiales actuelles et l'exploitation future de l'espace. D'un point de vue technologique et économique, il n'est pas envisageable pour le moment de nettoyer significativement ces orbites. La priorité doit donc être mise sur la stabilisation de cette population à travers des comportements vertueux, à la fois dans le design des nouveaux véhicules spatiaux, mais aussi dans leur mise en œuvre. Cette priorité est d'autant plus grande que l'augmentation du nombre de lancements orbitaux par des acteurs publics et privés issus du New Space, en particulier le développement des mégaconstellations, augmente significativement le risque de collision entre satellites et non plus seulement avec des débris spatiaux. Par conséquent, associée à la problématique de pollution déjà existante des débris spatiaux, la problématique d'une gestion d'un trafic spatial, ce qu'on appelle le STM pour Space Traffic Management, est aujourd'hui posée par l'ensemble des acteurs spatiaux. Sur ces deux problématiques, la France et le CNES sont depuis longtemps engagés et particulièrement actifs sur la scène internationale afin de promouvoir les bons comportements. La France est ainsi membre fondatrice de l'IADC, Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee, réunissant les 13 principales agences spatiales dont l'objectif est depuis plus de 20 ans de rassembler les meilleurs experts mondiaux en vue d'édicter des recommandations pour la non-prolifération des débris vers les acteurs spatiaux. Ces recommandations ont été mises à jour en 2019 sous la présidence du CNES. Le CNES a également initié à cette occasion la mise en place d'un rapport régulier de l'IADC sur l'état de la pollution spatiale. Il y a aussi un consensus international sur le besoin de trouver un fonctionnement qui permette de garantir la viabilité de l'utilisation de l'espace en sécurité pour les infrastructures avec un nombre d'acteurs en forte croissance. Le CNES représente la France dans le consortium EU-ISST créé en 2015 pour répondre à la décision 541 du 16 avril 2014 du Parlement européen. Pour la Commission européenne, le consortium est le socle de base du STM en Europe à travers 3 services opérationnels qui sont rendus depuis juillet 2016, la gestion des risques de collision, le suivi des rentrées atmosphériques et l'étude des fragmentations. Au total, vous le voyez, la France et le CNES sont ainsi engagés de longue date dans la préservation de l'espace et la gestion opérationnelle des risques de collision est l'une de ses contributions les plus fortes. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Jean-Yves. Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll go down to our next speaker, and then we'll have questions for all. Our next speaker is Chris Blackerby, the CEO of Astroscale. Prior to joining Astroscale, he served as the NASA attaché for Asia, the senior policy official in the U.S. Embassy Tokyo from 2002 to 2017. Chris, let's hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Victoria. Thank you so much. It's really great to be here at this conference here at Paris Peace Forum. I talk at a lot of space conferences, but to be here at something that goes beyond space, I think is really important and really vital at this point. The theme of the conference that I see, the Paris Peace Forum this year, this bouncing back to a better planet, and lots of sessions on coronavirus and how to respond and work internationally to come up with solutions, are so applicable to the issues of space security. As Jean-Yves just said, this is basically pollution of a natural resource. The fact is that Earth's orbits are crowded, and we are wholly reliant on the data we receive from satellites for services in everything we do, from daily activities to long-term environmental monitoring to disaster response. And really, this global pandemic that we're in right now has only highlighted the importance of satellite data from orbits. As all of us are stuck in our homes and relying on this kind of communication, it becomes more and more important to recognize how much we need those orbits. And it's only going to get more important as self-driving cars become more prevalent. Internet of Things, we're going to see how important it is. So here at Astroscale, we recognize that this is a global issue. And without international cooperation, it will not succeed. We're a company that is small, we're a startup, but we have 150 people in 5 countries, and our mission is the safe and sustainable development of space for the benefit of future generations. And what we're focused on is providing that through on-orbit satellite servicing. And we're doing that in various ways. We want to bring down debris that is currently in orbit. There's upper stage rocket bodies, there are defunct satellites, large pieces of debris. We want to go and bring those down and remove them from being a threat. Secondly, we want to prepare satellites before they launch so that they can be brought down easily. One of the biggest things to drive this market is going to be affordability. It's going to be a cost, it is a cost question. And so the best way to reduce cost is to prepare satellites for removal before launch. So we're proposing that satellites before they launch put on a docking plate, a plate on each satellite that makes it easier to capture and then bring down when it's done with its life, or when it fails in orbit, which does happen. We're also looking at space situational awareness. So looking at satellites in orbit and in situ space situational awareness, having dedicated satellites in orbit to understand the environment and understand what's happening gives us better appreciation and understanding of what we have to avoid. Now that can combine with ground-based space situational awareness as well. We can have a very clear picture of what we need to avoid in orbit. And finally, we are focused on life extension of satellites. So in the geo belt, which is the much higher orbital region around Earth, there are some large satellites, and as they get toward the end of their life, we want to be able to extend it to either refuel, to fix, to extend, so that they don't risk becoming debris in long term. So through those 4 business lines, we're focused on providing on-orbit servicing that can help to better the orbital environment. And we need to do a lot of stuff to focus on that. It's not just a technology question. This is a question of shaping policies, of clarifying the business case, of making sure that we're all on board to globally go out and find a solution. And that, again, is why this is such an important conference to be at and such an important issue to highlight at something like this. It's vital for us in the space industry to look outside the space industry, to raise awareness and look for answers, look for better ideas. And so I call on those of you who are here as other speakers, as guests, as attendees, to think about this problem, and also to help us consider best ways to make sure that we can solve an issue which is very difficult to solve. How do we think of creative ways to do this? How do we incentivize people to take action? This is an environmental problem, and just like terrestrially, environmental problems are difficult to solve. But I know we can do it as we work together. So we're excited to be here and excited to take your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, our last speaker before we go on to the discussion is David Bertolotti, Director for Institutional International Affairs, Eutelsat. Before joining Eutelsat, he worked for 17 years for the French MFA, mostly in the political military field, with a strong focus on disarmament and non-proliferation, including First Committee and space-related issues. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victoria, and I too would like to thank the Paris Peace Forum for including a session on this very, very important topic. Obviously, it's quite crucial for a satellite operator like Eutelsat, both to guarantee the continuity of service to our users, and we serve through our 39 satellites, we serve about 1 billion users worldwide, but also to guarantee the continuity of investments in the domain, because if access to space becomes too risky and if assets are at risk of being lost, of course, the business case is affected quite dramatically. So I think that operators like Eutelsat have a lot to share, a lot of experience. So we don't consider ourselves as old space, but simply as experienced operators, with also plans actually to be active in the new orbits, including LEO. I mean, we have our own plan for an IoT constellation in lower Earth orbit. But clearly, if we look at the current sort of normative environment, it is quite unsatisfactory from our point of view. And I would say three things there. First of all, clearly, I think we all know that the framework is dated and undersubscribed. Dated in the sense that it was mainly designed for government-led operations, which is no longer the case. And it's also really undersubscribed. I mean, if you look at the Convention on Liability, for instance, or registration, it's very, very far from being universal, although an increasing number of states are active in space. Secondly, I would say it's still maintaining a fairly artificial divide between security-related issues and peaceful users-related issues. And lastly, although you know a lot of things have been done in recent years, it's still moving too slowly to catch up with the actual developments led by the private sector. And if you take, for instance, the well-known long-term sustainability guidelines that are a splendid piece of work, but they were adopted in 2019. Building on a GGE that was convened in 2013. So if I want to be a bit provocative, I would say that at this pace, men will be back on the moon before there is a next step. So that would be one of my messages. We really have to speed up the pace at which we try to take account of the new reality in outer space. One remark also I would like to make is about what exactly we call actually space activities, and what I would like to stress is that, at least from the point of view of an operator, space infrastructure is increasingly going to be viewed as a system, and with no separate treatment of the different orbits, and no sort of single perception of Earth to space relation. I mean, we will have space to space communication between different orbits, and they will be linked together, often optically, and a lot also will rely on terrestrial infrastructure. And so I know we're focusing a lot, for instance, when we talk about threats, we're focusing a lot on threats in outer space with views of weaponization that are, real, but perhaps still a bit exaggerated threats against terrestrial infrastructure, whether physical or cyber, have to be taken into account. So just as to outline a few ideas that we can discuss further, for us, there are 3 or 4 major issues at stake. One is clearly how on-orbit operations are performed, and today most of this ballet is managed by the operators, and actually geo operators did a lot in this respect in the 2000s. It's a good illustration of what we could do in the future. You know, we started with best practices from the trade and ISO procedures. Then they were codified in the so-called IADC, Space Debris Mitigation Guidelines. And finally, they were sort of taken on board by COPIOS. So we could do this. We could do this again. Prevention of interference, another big issue, especially for SATCOM operators. Debris, they were mentioned. They are probably the most sort of present issue on minds in this respect. And finally, security, which for me is both the threat of weaponization and cyber threats as well. So happy to discuss those 4 areas a little bit more in depth, or to address questions from our audience in this regard.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Okay, so once again, I'd like to remind our audience that you can send questions in via the chat on the conference platform. But before we go to that, I'd like to have a few questions of my own I'd like to ask. We kind of tapped on it a little bit, but I really want to emphasize, you know, what does this panel see as the biggest threats to space safety? And what type of governance gaps are we looking at? Who would like to take that one first? Then I'll jump up.
Was it called for anybody, Victoria?
Anybody? Yeah, please.
Okay.
Chris,
Well, sure. Main threats. So it was mentioned about the counter space threats. That's obviously always something that we have to be aware of. More of a larger geopolitical issue, and I don't want to paper over that or talk past it, but that's something that's very big, and again is more of a geopolitical one. But that's clearly a threat. You know, I think already it was mentioned how many pieces of debris are already in orbit. Already, I think you mentioned it in your opening remarks, Victoria. I mean, over 20,000 pieces that are over 10 centimeters, millions, hundreds of millions that are at a centimeter or below, all of which can do significant damage. And so current debris is certainly a major risk when you're having to move the space station, when you're having to be wary. We hear often about a potential debris on debris collision. 2 pieces of debris that are coming at each other that can't maneuver, and that we're just crossing our fingers and hoping that that they don't hit. That's not a solution. And so right now, current debris is a problem. And then with the decreased launch cost, the decreased satellite development cost, we're going to see so many more assets in orbit that it's just going to get more and more difficult. And even if these large constellations that are launching, there's satellite operators that are launching hundreds and thousands of satellites. Even if they try to take into account safety, which they are, just by mathematically, you increase the number of assets in an area, there's going to be more potential for accident, and so we have to be wary of that. And so that's something that's a concern. So removing debris that's currently there and preparing satellites that launch to be removed is I think one of the most important issues on safety that we need to be aware of. Right now, it's a fairly low probability, extremely high impact event. That probability is only going to increase, and it's incumbent on us now to take action. So it's not something that we have to deal with repercussions of further down the line.
Thank you, Chris. David, did you want to add in?
Yes, thank you, Victoria. And I would like to build on what Chris said about debris. I mean, he's absolutely right, but I think it also underlines first the need to improve registration of space objects. especially for all the new sort of vehicles or spacecrafts that are likely to enter orbit, especially low Earth orbits. And secondly, also because I mean, Astroscale proposed business is absolutely fascinating, but I think it typically also raises the issue of how we would deal with on-orbit maneuvering, because you know. On the face of it, what would distinguish a perfectly legitimate approach by a future Astroscale vehicle to remove debris from orbit, what would distinguish that from a hostile maneuvering of a spacecraft against another? So we really have to sort of be prepared to better manage on-orbit operations through a better picture of the space situation on all orbits. And that is why I think it also calls for a very inclusive approach of the next steps in building rules or guidelines, whatever they are. It's been very sort of state-centric so far, but clearly we also have to build on the experience of other actors, in particular operators.
Thank you, David. And I just want to touch on something for the audience members that are familiar with the need to do registration. Can you talk a little bit just about what the governance is and what the standard operating procedure is for registration for those who are not familiar with space?
Would you like me to do that, or was it for?
Yeah. Since you brought it, David, since you brought it up, and then Johnny, will go on to you.
Well, I mean, the International Convention on Registration, of course, invites countries that have subscribed to register with the UN Secretary General space objects. But the thing is, I mean, first of all, not all countries do that because it's one of those undersubscribed instruments, as I mentioned in the beginning. Then there is the whole issue of the transfer of ownership, and sometimes it doesn't change the registration of the object, which is of course a problem. So these are, you know, very simply put, these are two of the challenges with registration. And of course, you could add to that for, I mean, probably legitimate security and defense concerns, some objects that we know full well are up there are not registered at all.
Great. Thank you very much for that clarification. Johnny, if you wanted to add something to this conversation.
Oui, moi je voudrais dire, comme l'ont dit les deux autres intervenants, qu'il y a deux sujets. En fait, la meilleure façon de ne pas avoir de débris, c'est de ne pas en créer. Et depuis quelques années, de ce point de vue-là, il y a beaucoup d'efforts qui ont été faits parce que auparavant, lorsqu'on mettait un satellite en orbite, eh bien, on créait des débris. Et à l'initiative de la France et la loi sur l'opération spatiale que nous avons votée en 2008, eh bien, les utilisateurs de l'espace sont de plus en plus vertueux, c'est-à-dire qu'ils créent de moins en moins de débris. Donc ça, c'est le premier sujet. Je pense que cette tendance a été prise parce que tout le monde a bien compris que l'espace est un bien commun, et même lorsqu'on voit le déploiement des méga-constellations, regardez ce qui s'est passé avec Starlink. À partir du moment où on a dit qu'il pouvait y avoir de la pollution lumineuse, immédiatement, les promoteurs de la constellation ont fait ce qu'il fallait pour que ce ne soit pas le cas. Donc, premier sujet, ne pas créer de débris, mais ça, je pense que quand même, c'est une approche qui est en train de se répandre chez tous les utilisateurs de l'espace. Deuxième approche, c'est savoir exactement où sont les objets, donc avoir un système de traffic management pour éviter les collisions en orbite, pour savoir exactement où nous en sommes. Et là, l'Union européenne, évidemment, a mis, comme je l'ai dit, un certain nombre d'efforts sur ce sujet. Alors, je suis d'accord, ça pourrait aller beaucoup plus vite, mais ça pourrait aussi aller moins vite. Et je pense qu'il y a vraiment une prise de conscience pour avancer sur ce sujet aussi.
Great, thank you, Johnny. That actually does raise the question about the need for space traffic management and the need to know where everything is. Is our space situational awareness, is it up to the task? Do we have sufficient information and knowledge of where objects are in orbit in order to make these decisions for governance discussions in the future? Anyone on the panel, what are your thoughts on that? And if not, how do we get to that point where SSA is solid enough that we can really depend upon it for future policy considerations? Again, anyone on the panel? Jean-Yves.
Non, nous avons une connaissance qui est insuffisante. Le seul système qui permet de savoir exactement où sont les débris en orbite, c'est le NORAD de l'armée américaine, mais il n'y a pas de système qui permet d'avoir la même carte que celle que fournit le NORAD, et donc c'est pour cela qu'il y a un certain nombre d'efforts dans le monde, et en particulier en Europe. Je pense qu'un système de localisation des objets dans l'espace, qu'on appelle le Space Traffic Management, sera le prochain grand projet de l'Union européenne, parce que c'est absolument indispensable.
Thank you. Other thoughts by the panelists? David or Chris, did you have
sorry, David, do you want to go?
Please, please.
So I would just agree. It's insufficient now, and even beyond that, what makes it risky is data is different. So we have a variety of countries and companies that are tracking the objects in space, and they provide different information. So what's worse than no information is potentially conflicting information, because then you really don't know what you're getting. So there are a variety of companies that are looking to try to improve on that, and countries. And what else is happening, I mentioned in my opening remarks, is there is a focus on in situ SSA. So actually going to space and getting a picture of it from orbits, and then combining that with some data from the ground would help to enhance that. Really, it comes down to developing some kind of international cooperative framework to understand STM, which is incredibly difficult, as you would guess. So that's that. But that, as we look forward to what are going to be the initiatives that we want to see more of, something like that, an open, a communicative international framework on STM is going to be essential.
Thank you. David?
Oh, I would really concur with Chris and Jean-Yves Le Gall. I mean, we don't have all the tools we would need to have. They are clearly today currently concentrated in the hands of a small number of actors. And while we don't fare too badly on the geo orbit, other orbital positions are much more challenging. And I think also what we have to consider in developing further space traffic management and SSA, and actually going to the point made by Chris, is that because increasingly those data will be used by a variety of private operators, it is very, very important to define the needs and design the tools in dialogue with them, because precisely they are the ones who know best what they need to use. So again, I think on that chapter, the process for designing new tools has to be as inclusive as possible.
Right, definitely, because there's different levels of space situational awareness. There's, the bare minimum of space flight safety, and then there's a more exquisite level when you have close approaches and things like that. And so obviously there's different levels that we need to be able to develop. And the question is, should this be, is space flight safety a public good that government should be providing, or is there kind of a minimum level, and then on top of that, the commercial sector should be adding in? I don't know that we've actually come to an answer on that. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on this issue. Anyone? If not, I can go on.
Okay, could you repeat that? Sorry, Victoria.
Just the space flight safety, the public good. Is spaceflight safety a public good?
I mean, geez, I'd say, yeah, I haven't thought about it in that specific way, but yes, I mean, we're all reliant on this. This is a public commons, as Jean-Yves said. This is what we're relying on is an orbital environment that is a natural resource. So, you know, I guess I'd turn around the question: is our forests or the air or rivers, are they a public good? I think generally we would say yes, they're a commons area that's a public good for society. I'd say that the orbital environment is at the same level.
Thank you, Chris. David or Jean-Yves, did you want to add to this?
Oui, non, je partage évidemment cette approche. L'espace est un bien public et un bien qui est unique. Et je crois que lors des démonstrations qui ont pu être faites par la Chine ou plus récemment l'Inde, une capacité de détruire des satellites en orbite qui ont généré des nuages de débris, eh bien, tout le monde a réalisé qu'il fallait faire très attention. Et par rapport à une attitude où il y a 20 ou 30 ans, on polluait l'espace en quelque sorte, eh bien aujourd'hui, aussi bien les acteurs publics que les acteurs privés, et je crois qu'il faut insister sur ce dernier point, ont bien compris qu'il fallait faire très attention. Et ce qui me frappe, c'est que dans les très nombreux projets de constellation avec des fonds privés, eh bien, cette préoccupation de faire attention à l'espace est totalement présente, même s'il n'y a pas une obligation légale. Donc vraiment, je crois qu'on peut se féliciter d'avoir un secteur spatial responsable comme nous l'avons, et bien au-delà des puissances publiques, mais les puissances privées aussi, parce que chacun a bien compris que polluer l'espace, eh bien, in fine, ça serait préjudiciable au business.
Thank you, Jean-Yves.
And I would add actually a thought. I mean, for sure, I mean, space is a common public good, but I think also perhaps it has suffered a bit in the first decades of space exploration and space usage of this view that it was an exceptional domain, perhaps a freer one. And now we realize, because we rely more heavily on it, that it's increasingly becoming like the other milieu, like airspace, like the high seas, and so to come back to the issue of debris and space traffic management, clearly, planes today all have a registration number under the Chicago Convention. That was not the case at the beginning of the aerospace adventure. Now all ships have an AIS signal and number, and when the AIS is switched off, it raises alarms. So we probably have to go in this direction in space as well, recognizing that it's probably still a fairly exceptional domain and something that has its share of dreamlike features, but at the same time it's also an area where a lot of people, companies and governments operate, and so you have to put a little bit more procedures in place.
Thank you, David. There's been several mentions of counter space capabilities, and for people who are new to space, it's the idea that there are assets that can interfere with other people's ability to use space, whether it's from ground to space to space, to a lesser extent, space to ground, or also things like jamming, electromagnetic interference, close approaches, cyber, that sort of thing. And if I may, I'd like to do a quick advertisement for a Secure World Foundation, my organization. We put together an unclassified counter space threat assessment that's updated every year. It's available on our website for free as a PDF, where we go through the United States, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, India. We added Japan and France this year, and talk about their counter space capabilities. And I will also add our executive summary is available in English and in French. So if you'd like to learn more about these issues, I'd suggest maybe perhaps checking out our website at swfound.org. I also want to touch on an issue that has come up a lot in today's conversation about the role of the commercial sector. And again, just to kind of contextualize this for people who are familiar with space issues, As I said before, there's maybe roughly around 3,300 active satellites currently. If you're looking at how many satellites are in theory planned based on filings for spectrum, there could be 107,000 additional satellites by the 2029. And again, obviously all those satellites will be launched. Clearly, they're not all going to make it, the business case for it. A significant percentage of those will. And so what we're looking at is a huge change in terms of the space domain. It's happening very quickly over the next couple of years. And the reason why it's different is that who is launching these satellites, these mega constellations? It's not nation states, it's the commercial sector. So we're going for, and we brought up, today already, the idea that space is a public good, it's a shared domain. How do we bring in the commercial sector into these conversations? Since governance implies that we're talking about nation states, but obviously the commercial sector plays a huge role in carrying out any governance mechanism that's agreed upon at the international level. How do we incorporate these voices and needs in international discussions on issues that often touch upon safety and security, which are difficult at the national level, much less the international level? So what does this panel think? How do we bring in the commercial sector to ensure that all stakeholders are involved? And I know we have a couple commercial actors on here, so we're off to a good start, but where do we go from here, particularly the international multilateral level? Who would like to answer that? Chris, you're looking thoughtful.
Yeah, well, there's so much to say to that. Yeah, I think
Please,
we all could.
We have time.
Probably have a. All right, we should probably have a whole panel on this topic alone. So I'll try to be brief. Just touch on a couple things. Yeah, it's a changing environment in this sense, and you mentioned it that this is a good start, that we have two commercial actors here along with a national space agency. So this kind of discussion is really essential. There are other groups that are out there that are already starting to think about these kind of questions. So there's a group called Confers, which, Victoria, you're obviously well familiar with, as Secure World works with Confers. This is a group that is, it's based in the US, but it's international. We're members from Japan, there's members from Europe, and Confers is looking at developing technical standards and best practices for servicing operations, for example. And it is a commercially driven group. So it is a group that is driven by commercial companies that are out there to put forward where we think the best practices are for doing on-orbit servicing operations and for limiting debris, for servicing satellites, for a variety of capabilities in orbit, and it's commercially driven. Commercial companies are involved in other initiatives as well. The World Economic Forum has put forward a proposal for a space sustainability rating, wherein they can satellite operators will have to adhere to certain standards for their satellites to be launched, and they get rated. This is similar to the LEED certification, environmental certification on buildings. They would get rated on, are they space sustainable? And they get a grade, A, B, C, or something of that nature. But that's being discussed right now, and that's being discussed by academics, commercial, government is all involved in that discussion. So we're at the front end of these conversations, but this is what it's going to take. Those are just two examples. There's a lot of conversations going on. So synthesizing those various discussions and trying to work toward what will become a best practice and an agreed upon step forward is going to be really important.
Thank you. Other thoughts from our panelists?
Perhaps if I may, Victoria, I would like to complement what Chris said by bringing a slightly different perspective and saying that I have the feeling that bringing in the view of the private sector is something that is fairly well done at the national scale. I mean, typically I can say, and I hope I won't be contradicted, but I think I can safely say that Eutelsat has an excellent relationship and constant dialogue with CNES, with the teams of Jean-Yves Le Gall. I think a number of actors are having a good dialogue with our national authorities. But this is done a little bit in silos, and that can sometimes fuel a tendency some governments to act on a shoot first basis or try to impose their national framework there, and by being the first to elaborate norms by if especially if it's a major spacefaring nation that has the ability to influence the entirety of the market, there is this risk that actually one national conversation drives the entire ecosystem. And this is where probably we have to think of a slightly different framework that would allow for a more global conversation with operators coming from different corners of the world. The Americas, of course, but also Europe that has its very distinctive framework, and certainly Asia as well. But to have this more global conversation.
Thank you, David. Jean-Yves, you're in a unique position as a representative of the National Space Agency. What is your take on this issue? Is he still there? You may have lost him. All right, well, we'll go on to the next question. If he wants to jump in on this later, we can. One of the things I wanted to bring up is I know we're actually, this is the hours going by fast, so we're close on time, a few more minutes. I want to make sure we talked about, the idea for today's discussion is talk about what governance challenges exist and how do we look towards the future. But I'd like just to, focus our lens on how things are going right now. And we've touched on it a little bit. Are the current best practices that exist in terms of responsible actors following international guidelines and rule of order, are these current best practices being followed? And I'm thinking specifically of things like the idea that you're supposed to, have an end of life plan for your satellite after 25 years, mitigating the deliberate creation of debris in orbit, that sort of thing. Are current best practices being followed? And if not, how do we incentivize good behavior? David or Chris, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Well, I think you're asking a very, very key question, Victoria, because actually it's, as very often, but implementation is key. I mean, it's fine and nice to have rules or guidelines or what have you, but if they are not implemented, this is a bit useless. So, I mean, if I take the example of France, clearly, as Jean-Yves Le Gall recalled, we have since 2008 a fairly comprehensive set of rules through the Loi Spatiale, the space law, and all its implementation measures and technical regulations. And by and large, they are in line with, for instance, the long-term sustainability guidelines. And we're now going into a review process in France, which will certainly help bring the law even more in line with those guidelines. But indeed, what I would like to see is a more generalized, more comprehensive movement like that. I think, if I'm not mistaken, but you would probably, as an observer and a very competent one, you would probably know that better. But I think that next year a working group should start actually looking at this in Vienna, actually implementation. But I think that yes, indeed. I mean, states should report about how they implement this. Because I mean, from an operator's point of view, it's also extremely important to ensure a level playing field. We have very, very high standards in France and in Europe generally, but we want to make sure also that in this future space race, we compete with people that apply the same set of rules.
Great, thank you, David. Before we move on to Chris, there's been several mentions of the long-term sustainability guidelines. And I just want to make sure, again, recognizing that we don't have a solidly space audience watching this. Just a quick background on that. The United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, or COPUOS, had a working group for the better part of a decade trying to come up with best practices or long-term sustainability guidelines. Full disclosure, Secure World's executive director, Peter Martinez, was the working group chair, so I'm extremely biased in how I view this. But I think this process was really admirable. They were able to come to consensus in 2019 and agree on 21 guidelines for the long-term sustainability of space, plus a preamble. And so that's really impressive, just considering as well, COPUOS at that point, I think, had 92 members, including the United States, Russia, China, Iran. There's a whole breadth of space powers and space users involved in the conversation. So they were able to come to consensus and agree on that. And as David said, the next step is implementation. It's not enough to come up with these governance mechanisms. I mean, anyone can write down an idea. It's just how do you carry it out fully? So with that brief interlude and interruption, Chris, you were going to talk about incentivization of good behavior, I think.
Yeah, and it is getting better, as has been mentioned by both Johnny and David. We do see better behavior by operators, and there's more attention to this. But there still is a lot more focus to go. You mentioned the 25-year rule. Again, for those not familiar, the rule is that once a satellite is done with its operational life, it needs to either deorbit if it's low enough, or move to what's called a graveyard orbit if it's in the geo orbits up higher, within 25 years of the end of its life. That's a long time. That's a quarter century. In the last 25 years, you probably can pull the statistics out, Victoria, but 25 years ago in 1995, how many satellites were in orbit? Not so many, a couple hundred, maybe, if that. So now we're up to, like you say, 3,300 operating, over 25,000 with greater than 10 centimeter debris. Go forward 25 years from now, what are we going to be at? I mean, we're going to be at potentially hundreds of thousands. So that's a long time. So we think that that's a bit longer than needed to maintain sustainability. So we would like to see those kind of regulations changed a bit. And countries are doing this. The U.S. is looking at it. So David talked about the national governments focusing on this, and they are. European governments are doing so. EU, Japan, they're all looking at these and thinking how best can they apply them. Of course, the reason why this is such an interesting field to be in, with difficult, challenging problems to address, is the big question of how do we do this internationally? How do we avoid a race to the bottom, as David referenced, where strict regulations are put in place in one country, so if I can't launch from country A because they have a strict regulatory regime, I'll just go to country B because they have an easier regulatory regime. We're both going to the same place. We're both going to the same orbit. The risk to sustainability is the same in both. How do you avoid that? And that, that's exactly what we're all trying to figure out right now. How we
don't want to have a situation. I'm sorry. You don't want to have a situation where you have flags of convenience for space, right? That's not something people want to see.
No.
Well, you touch on to a topic that I'd like to get your thoughts on, the idea of capacity building, whether we have a space traffic management regime or just a shared governance mechanism. None of this will work until we have the understanding and, I think, sophistication of, relatively evolved policies. And one of the things that comes up a lot is people say, well, why don't you just get some sort of ICAO for space, the International Civil Aviation Authority organization, which, basically networks together all the various civil aerospace agencies or administrations together to create air traffic control network. And the response that I always have to that is like, look, that would imply there's the equivalent for space, and that each country has either a space agency or a space administration or even space rules and guidelines. And that is not the case. Maybe there's roughly 80 countries or so that have satellites, but there's really maybe 14 or so that can launch satellites. So when we're talking about these space traffic mechanisms or these shared governance mechanisms, how do we improve capacity building at the both international and the national level? What are your guys' thoughts on this issue?
In terms of capacity building, like growing the space communities, I'm saying, Victoria, like assuring that other countries have
understanding like the need for the policies.
Yeah. Okay. So the understanding the need, I mean, that's a huge deal. And from our perspective, building awareness is one of the most important things, and another reason why it's so great to be here, where we can start spreading this out to people outside the community. When I talk at space conferences, I open by saying everybody knows this is a problem. We're all already aware of it because we talk about it a lot, but I want to build awareness globally beyond the space community, and that's essential. And that's essential to do with a variety of constituencies. It's essential to do with the general public, with other businesses that are benefiting from space but aren't necessarily a space company. It's of course essential for policymakers. And so that's why we have, again, I mentioned earlier, we're not just a technology company. We have a strong policy team in Tokyo, in Harwell outside of London, in Washington, D.C., that are all in there influencing what the policymakers do, talking to them, educating them, telling them, here's what the issue is and here's why we need to take care of it quickly. If we don't do this, if we don't address these thorny problems now, we're going to be looking back and regretting it. And that's just, you know, we need to continue to bring this up all the time because there's a lot of issues out there and it's easy to get distracted. I completely understand that. And space seems far away, but it's not.
This is true. David, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with that. Although perhaps I should say, I mean, there's a little bit of a paradox there when you talk about awareness, because I think that obviously, and given the numbers you recalled, the involvement in space or with space of a number of countries has risen, and so there are now a lot of actors, government actors, that are very well aware of what is at stake. But still, at least in some frameworks, in the UN typically, and there I'm also talking a little bit, remembering my former hat as a government official, the debate is still a bit tainted by the sort of 60s or 70s mindsets, you know, that the responsibility falls with the big spacefaring nations because they have the biggest number of assets, and so they are responsible. They should sort out the mess. There's always this fear that more rules, more constraints would actually prevent newcomers from developing activities in space, whereas in my view, it's exactly the opposite. It is, if we don't do anything, that new entrants will be prevented from joining the outer space adventure and reaping all the benefits. So we have to really have people understand that rules or guidelines are not designed to prevent access, but on the contrary, to continue to allow it. The other point maybe as we approach our conclusion that I wanted to make, and perhaps that's an argument also that can help raise awareness, is that really also, I mean, as a SATCOM operator, it's easier to say, but I think that space shouldn't be that dissociated anymore from the new economy and from the data-driven economy. Basically, space is an enabler of data exchange. We're an essential link in the chain. And so if we also raise the awareness of the other actors in the data business, we are probably more likely to make this a real global issue and not just a specialized issue for experts of outer space.
Thank you, David. I'm really glad you brought up the point about, you know, governance does not mean limiting access, because that is a concern and definitely something you want to try and avoid to make sure that it helps shape the space environment, but it does not preclude usage of space. And I think oftentimes when the more established space actors talk about space governance, they tend to talk about, well, the space domain is changing, and there's almost a finger pointing at the new actors. And clearly, that's not the point. Really quickly, Chris, do you have any last thoughts you want to share before we wrap up in the next minute or so?
I think just a reiteration of what I had said earlier. I want to express to this audience that this is not an issue that's far away. Space is not something that you think about in Star Trek, Star Wars. It's something that's right there, and we're benefiting from it every day. And we need a global consortium and global awareness that this is an issue, and it's an environment that we need to maintain sustainability of. So your support is going to be essential to make sure we're able to preserve this for future generations.
Absolutely. And I would just like to jump on that topic in the 10 seconds I have left. We mentioned about countries being space actors or space launchers or what have you, but every citizen every single person on this planet is a space user, because the information and data helps everyone. And so it behooves us to work together to ensure that space is accessible and usable to all over the long term. And topics like this conversation we've had with the Paris Peace Forum today, I think, are excellent starts to this. So with that, we are out of time. Unfortunately, I would love to continue this conversation longer. Please join me in virtually thanking our speakers, and we look forward to seeing you at the rest of the Paris Peace Forum. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. Thanks, David.